Hey! Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Just lighting some Palo Santo here. This is a good way to start off any transmission of bringing in the good juju, so to speak. So, welcome to Catalyst Energies, and welcome to this full moon full moon forecast, where we go over the main astrological themes for the second half of the lunar quarter. So we're going to be looking at our Taurus full moon that is on the 5th of November and up through our Scorpio new moon on the 20th of November. So 2025, just in case you forgot what year it is. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate all of you so very much. So, yay, I'm back on camera. And don't be fooled, it's not like I put that much effort into presenting myself on camera, as you can probably tell, right? Just put on a beanie and a shirt, but I do have a ring light set up so that there is some more than natural lighting to illuminate the space here. But we're going to be primarily looking at the astrological chart. I'm going to be showing you a little bit of my astronomy software just so we can get a view of what's actually going on in the night sky for this full moon. We're going to talk about Andromeda and some starseed stuff, of course, and just kind of get grounded in what the next 2 weeks astrologically and otherwise may present for us. So, I don't really have any PSAs to share with you right this moment, other than if you're interested in Catalyst membership and everything that goes along with it, you can follow a link in the description box for Catalyst membership, and it'll give you all the details. I've had some new members recently, and it's been really fun, and I am enjoying the readings still that I'm doing. So I encourage you, if you want a little bit more to supplement these new and full moon forecasts that I do, and you maybe are even interested in your own personal reading once a month, every 4 to 6 weeks, get a personal mini reading, dedicated discount code, all of that stuff. I would encourage you to just take a look at what Catalyst membership has to offer. But otherwise, not really much to report in terms of business right now. So at least here in the northern hemisphere, north central Pennsylvania, we are busy winterizing our property still, splitting firewood, stacking firewood, making sure everything is closed up for the winter. It was fairly frosty this morning, so November is already pretty cold. And I mean, I wouldn't say pretty cold, right? We're getting below freezing. So houseplants have come in, pool has been closed, leaves are falling pretty rapidly, and all the outdoor stuff is put away, and the equipment is put away, and we're really hunkering down for the winter season. So I hope everyone is doing well, regardless of where you are, what season you've come into. Okay, so what can I say about this full moon period? Well, some key words here, maybe some key concepts to keep in mind, and a little bit of just a teachable moment about how the universe likes to talk to us. In fact, that's where I'm actually going to start, just something light, just a personal story to share with you about how spirit may talk to us, synchronicities, and everybody is in a different place along their journey. And if you're a person that is still working out, what does it really sound like when my intuition is communicating with me, my guides are guiding me? Because some people maybe have very direct and audible types of interactions, but most of the time, at least in my experience, being a reader and a conduit, and certainly in the healing arts as an energy worker for multiple decades now, I would say that oftentimes it's more experiential, circumstantial. Sometimes you just know things and you don't know how you know them, but you just know. For me personally, there's a lot of dream walking where I get a lot of information in the dreamscape. It's very symbolic, right? You have to unpack it. A lot of times things are coded, and that's probably a good thing. You don't necessarily want things just dropped into your consciousness as if they are, coming from a satellite or something. I would really be careful about things like that. But So I see my own healer every 2 to 3 weeks. Being that I'm a full-time massage therapist, on top of doing this, it's really imperative that I'm getting that work on a regular basis. And a massage therapist who is also an energy healer and an intuitive is truly worth their weight in gold, as I can attest to. So I have that person for myself, and I go to see her regularly. We are colleagues. And friends as well. And so I went in for my session this past weekend, so Friday, and it turned much more into an energy healing as opposed to a massage treatment, which was fine with me because it's like what's needed in the moment. And at one point, she had put this very large crystal in between my legs as I was lying on the treatment table, which she often will do depending on what's going on. And I was like, man, that's a honking huge stone. That's awesome. And so we did the session, and then at the end, she leaves the room, and I kind of just turn my head to the side before I lift myself off the treatment table, and I noticed that she's got this huge piece of smoky quartz sitting on the table that I noticed was new. And I was just kind of sitting there admiring it, and I was like, wow, look at that thing. That is huge. I wonder where she got it. And I was like, I wonder if that's what she put on the table. And in fact, it was. So before I went into this session, I had made, I was like, oh, I'm going to go to TJ Maxx, if you're familiar with TJ Maxx. We have one in Williamsport. And I was like, I'm going to go to TJ Maxx and get X, Y, and Z. And then before the session, I was like, you know what? I don't need to go there. I'm not going to do it. So, but I had planned originally to go there. So you might see where the story is going. So I get up from the treatment table. I'm admiring this huge piece of smoky quartz. I'm like, I wonder if that's what she used. So I go out to the front. We're talking, just tying up the end of the session, all that stuff. And it came up about it, and she said, yeah, I put that smoky quartz there. I was like, oh yeah, I saw that when I was getting up. I was admiring it. I just was so fixated on it because I knew it was new, but I was just like really drawn to it. And she's like, yeah, I used, that was the big piece that I used during your session. I was like, where did you get that? And she's like, you're not going to believe this, but TJ Maxx has amazing deals on big pieces of mineral. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I was like, I was going to go to TJ Maxx, and then I decided not to. And she's like, sounds like you're going. And I was like, it sounds like I'm going. And that's what I did. And I went and I found this honkin' piece of smoky quartz at a just a huge discount. It turns out that TJ Maxx is a great option for big pieces of crystal geodes that I would have paid 3 times as much for at your standard like rock or woo-woo crystal shop. And I was just like, wow. So I picked up this huge piece of smoky quartz. It's now in my home. I actually have it right now put right next to my modem because smoky quartz is actually really good for absorbing the impact of radiation, geopathic stress, think about, solar activity, think about the Schumann resonance, all of that kind of stuff. Just think about wireless signal and your modem, for instance. So that's where I have it right now. But it also prompted me to go find my piece of smoky quartz and put it around me. And so there's a lot of benefits. But again, there is that, just the way that spirit speaks to us and through us. It's not always obvious, but in that type of situation, it was really obvious. You better go to TJ Maxx and get that piece of smoky quartz at like 1/3 of the price that you would pay otherwise, because you need it right now around you. And here we are. So that's my little story. I love telling those stories. I think that personal experience and sharing those personal experiences, those real life examples of intuition and spiritual journey are really important, because I think a lot of times we get kind of caught up in the veneer and the superficial glossiness of like, oh, spirituality and awakening. And there's a lot of fluff, right? And anybody who's had a reading with me knows that I cut right to the chase, and there is no fluff. And a lot of times I have to give difficult messages, but in the end, it turns out to be things that people really appreciate and need to hear. But also too that we're still people, humans in this whole experiment here. We might be souls, but we're having a human experience, but we still need to have the human experience, which is a great segue into this whole transmission about the upcoming full moon and being again, if you go back to the new moon energy that we started this lunar cycle with about the conscious participation in the process, right? That we actually have to walk the path, that we have to actually span, the two sides of the embankment, right? That we have to cross the bridge. And it's the same thing, just being human. We have to actually still be human and experience what it's like to be in form. And it's not always going to be like these obvious, like, well, in some cases it is obvious, but it's not going to always like fit this like mold that everybody has about how spirit talks to each of us and to you personally, right? It's your own personal language with God. And sometimes it's as simple as, oh, I was planning to go to TJ Maxx and I decided not to. And oh, wait, that's where this crystal that I actually really need right now is sitting there waiting for me. And I didn't even realize that I was planning to go there for that until all these other pieces fit together. It's really just a beautiful tapestry life is, right? It's not a linear, just like you get here and then you get here and then it's great and you never have to do anything again, right? You're just awake. It doesn't work like that. But and this is how the readings are too, that I do with people, the intuitive readings, and certainly the astrology. I mean, I've been doing this for years now, and I still have instances of having my mind blown in like the most delightful way. Nothing is really shocking or surprising, but I never want to not be mind blown about the things that come through for people in their readings. Like, I want to be surprised and delighted with what comes out in the cards, for instance, or what channels through an astrology reading as much as the person receiving it, right? That's why it's so impactful. So anyway, personal story about how intuition might work for you. It's certainly how it works for me. And now I have this huge piece of smoky quartz that is really doing some valuable work for me personally. And now I'm wearing the piece that I do have, and it's making a huge difference. Okay, so let's get into the astrology of this coming 2 weeks. So the full moon is on November 5th. The full moon itself will be in Taurus. I will show you on the chart what life is going to look like when the sun is at the same degree as this upcoming full moon, because the passage of time and the patience that's involved in the passage of time is something I think we really need to wrap our heads around right now. Now, there are going to be transits coming up even before the full moon. So I'd say so today's Sunday, the 2nd, the 4th, into the 5th, that are going to really trigger a lot of flash and maybe some anger and some impulsiveness. And I'm going to show that to you in the chart. And there is a natural emergence that is really coming out in this full moon that is, again, kind of having us exist in two places at once, where we may be identified with this drive to go deeper and to establish new connections. It could be in our family, it could be through our spiritual journey, it could be in any area of life. And so again, knowing where these signs and these positions are in your chart will show you what area of life, right? What house these things are happening in will usually tell you what area of life you're going to be experiencing these things. But in a general sense, that we might have this drive and really be identified with this drive and this urge to establish new connections. But what is really highlighting through this process is that the emergence of the emergence of whatever naturally occurs out of those new connections is going to take time, and we need to execute some patience here in general. But there will be not only things that are going to kind of force the issue, right, that we might want to act impulsively about, or there'll be some sort of flash, unexpected change, but also to many instances over the next 2 weeks where we will find ourselves continuing to reevaluate things in our lives, either mostly in relationships, and those can be all kinds of relationships, right? They don't have to be all personal. They can be professional, they can be spiritual, they can be social relationships, they can be relationships with ourselves, right? I mean, relationship is really where it all happens, right? That is, when it comes down to it, every relationship that we participate in is a reflection of our relationship to source. And so you find you find your pathway back to God through whatever relationships you're working on. And it's a very specific, it's a very powerful form of yoga, right? Which is union. So there'll be lots of opportunities that will change things drastically or bring up issues that are really going to agitate us. And they could be social or they could be very personal, but they also are there'll be transits that will influence and just kind of push us in a direction to reevaluate these relationships, because it's through that process that we are consciously participating in the moving from where we've been to where we are going, right? We can't just necessarily expect it to just get there and then we get to be there. We actually have to participate. And that's what a lot of this lunar cycle is. Now, Venus, as we're going to see on the chart, today is in conjunction with Arcturus. So this is a big activation for Arcturian starseed people, and certainly all of us. But if you are an Arcturian starseed person, or you're really connected to Arcturus, this is a pretty big one, because Venus rules the sign of Libra, and the star Arcturus right now is in the portion of sky of 24, 25 degrees Libra. So that's where Venus will be today. And so as she's moving through these last couple of degrees of Libra, where she's very powerful and very much at home, as we talked about on the last transmission about being, Lady Justice, really able to feel what is balanced, right? And if you remember, I was just like, there's no bullshitting ourselves anymore. So as she's coming into these last degrees, not only are we not bullshitting ourselves anymore, we're really fine-tuning and feeling out exactly where those subtle discrepancies are and how we are going to really respond to them in terms of the power and resources that they're ultimately generating. Because Venus is going to come into Scorpio, and she is not at her best in Scorpio. She is opposite the sign that she's at home in, which is Taurus, right? So this full moon is ruled by Venus, and she's about to come into her weakest position. Venus, and I'm a Venus and Scorpio person, so believe me, I know this dynamic all too well, and that's why I speak so directly about it. Because she, Venus wants to be comfortable. Venus wants to be beautiful. Venus wants harmony, right? In relationships, in projects, in resources. It's value and meaning. It's symmetry. It's balance with, in terms of Libra. So coming into Scorpio, it's very raw. It's very dark. And she is just not at her best. It's a very difficult position, but it's also very, very powerful position for Venus to be in if you can really fly it right. So this is going to be an interesting time period, and you're going to find, I think, that people who are very uncomfortable with the fruits of not just their labors, but their collective labors are going to have a difficult time with this time period. So on the other side of it, though, being very aware of how things have been, in terms of the balance in relationships, the other side of that is very consciously and intentionally going into these darker spaces of Scorpio, which the Sun has been in, Mercury has been in, Mars has been in. Mercury is going to retrograde back into Scorpio. We are not done with Scorpio. It's just going to become that much more palpable with Venus involved, right? We're going to really feel the value of these collective resources that Scorpio ultimately represents. And so it can be, you can just find yourself really acting out, and being very uncomfortable, or just like having the ability to really manage this space. So in the tarot, for instance, if you need an image to really, or a symbol to really represent Venus and Scorpio, is the Seven of Cups. And I know this came up for somebody in the membership that I just did a recent reading for. So that person, if you're listening, you already are familiar with this energy because it's come out for you. But the Seven of Cups, depending on, it just depends on what deck you're using in terms of tarot. But the idea here is that you're kind of inundated with all of these options, the Seven of Cups. And sometimes it's intoxicating. Sometimes it can be delusionary because you are kind of almost like drowning in your intoxication. You know, it's a little bit of a bypass spiritually because you have all these options in front of you. And so you just kind of, you know, you never really settle on one. You just kind of allow yourself to, you know, be overtaken by the intensity of all of it, right? In the Thoth Tarot, which is very, in my opinion, using that tarot deck is very powerful in its imagery. The Seven of Cups is the key word is debauch, like debauchery. Like now you can see with Venus and Scorpio how easy it is to find the value in the dark side of things. If you don't really know who you are and what actually is meaningful to you, because then you kind of, again, then you get kind of pulled into the false illusions, you get pulled into the intoxication of the situation, and ultimately it leads to a type of indolence, which is the Eight of Cups, right? Where you're completely drained because you are just, you know, you're not refilling the cups, so to speak. You're just taking from them or just letting the fog of the illusion surround you. So, and it can be analysis paralysis. That's the other thing too about Venus in Scorpio, because it can be kind of just this mantle of shadow over, you know, things that are really visceral and palpable, right? In terms of relationships and resources and things. So it's going to be an interesting time with Venus and Scorpio. So right now, as she's finishing up in Libra, she's going to be, you know, this is the time to really tap into the essence of that. Is that bridge actually balanced? Is that bridge actually structurally sound, right? Did you rebuild, like in the case of my own property, like did you rebuild the bridge before the old one really fell apart, right? Is it actually built correctly? You know, because there's no going back necessarily, but at least having a sense of what to expect in terms of the balance of things is going to help navigate Venus and Scorpio, because you know, just sinking into the abyss of things. And if you are balanced, if your relationships are balanced, if you know why you're there and what you are getting out of things and how to navigate that situation, then Venus and Scorpio can be a time to really just settle into the darker spaces and really get a sense of what's going on down there. But if you are not settled, if things are not balanced, those things are going to come out too. And Venus does not like to be uncomfortable. And Scorpio realm is all uncomfortable, right? I mean, other than when you are like in the moment of that like intense drive and yearning. So right now is a good time to, you know, like lean into the reevaluation of relationships, because you want to be very clear with what connections new connections that you are working to establish, right? That you are establishing and wanting to make. And then because, you know, within 6 months, those types of things are going to start emerging come early May. And I've kind of felt this for a while now, that early May is going to be, you know, April into May into June is going to be a time period where a lot of things start really presenting themselves very openly. So everything will be direct in the astrology chart as well. Uranus will be back into Gemini. It'll be where it is right now. So, and I'll show it to you on the chart. So speaking of the chart, let's start. Actually, what I want to show with you first, before we get into the astrology, is I want to show you the connection to Andromeda. So those of you who have Andromeda starseed connections, this is going to be very relevant to you. Certainly, let's make sure that we're all shared here. That's not entirely, that's really annoying. Let's see here. I had it queued up perfectly so you could see it, but you'll get the idea. So this is my astronomy software. This here is the full moon on the 5th. Now it's in the constellation of Aries, but it is also in the zodiac sign of Taurus. And I've explained this many times what the difference is, right? Sidereal astrology is showing you where things are in relation to the actual sky, the constellations, the fixed stars, and how they make up constellations. So you can see that the full moon will be in the sign or in the constellation of Aries. But in Western astrology, it is in the space of sky that is in Taurus. And in fact, it is at 14 degrees Taurus, 13 to 14 degrees Taurus. And if you align the software correctly, you'll see that it's actually perfectly aligned longitudinally with this star that's right here. This is called Almach. It is in the foot of the Andromeda constellation. It is in the chained foot of the Andromeda constellation. So if you need a little bit of review about Andromeda as a mythological character, I'll give you the really Cliff Notes version, is that she was a princess of of Cassiopeia. That was her mother, the queen of this, this island nation. And basically her mother was like, my daughter's the shit, and she's more beautiful than all these nymphs. And the nymphs got pissed and they were like, release the Kraken to Neptune, basically. And so essentially they were like, you either sacrifice your daughter to the Kraken or he's going to destroy your entire city, your entire country. So Andromeda does her duty as, even though she had nothing to do with this, because she was, the one that was kind of drawn into the middle of this because of the vanity of her own mother. Oh boy. As a total aside, I had listened to, and maybe I'll put this on Telegram. That's usually where I post like links to other content that I think is interesting. But there was this one from Academy of Ideas about the archetype of the terrible mother being very present right now. So anyway, that just really sparked that, because it was her mother that dragged her into this crap. But anyway, Andromeda still went and became the sacrificial lamb for the Kraken, and she was chained up to the rocks. And if you ever saw Clash of the Titans, then you know that it was Perseus on Pegasus that came and blah, 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 rescued her. Okay. So that's the story related to Andromeda. And as far as Andromedan star seeds, so if you have connections to Andromeda constellation, or certainly even the Andromeda galaxy, which is in this constellation, by the way, there's a lot of elements to Andromedan star seeds that are very much about freedom. They're very much about liberation. They are about being just you as you are in any given moment. So there's all these like character traits that go along with being an Andromedan starseed that have to do with, really being kind of a spiritual nomad and traveling freely and not really putting up with gaslighting or emotional manipulation. And they'll be the first ones to flake out on plans, because when they made the plans, they felt it, but at the time of the plans, they didn't feel it. So they're like, whatever, all these other things. And I think that the connection to Andromeda as a being has a lot to do with the fact that, with great power comes a lot of responsibility. And so freedom and liberation and this mechanism of social revolution that goes along with being an Andromeda starseed also has this responsibility attached to it. And then you have Andromeda as a figure that, really stepped into her role, and that's where her freedom truly came from, right? So if we were to really unpack, some of the nature of this particular star from like an ancient astrology perspective, there's a lot of positive aspects that come with Almach. And you can read about this yourself if you go to a site like astrologyking.com. It has all the fixed stars and has a really good compilation of all of the different attributes of these fixed stars from different sources. So there is, oftentimes you'll have these stars will have the character of different planets in our solar system. So a Venus character and a Mars character. But really, some of the more generalized traits here about Almach, the chain, the foot that's chained of Andromeda is, or has and they break down the name of these stars to the different like languages and where they came from. But similar words meaning like deep in water, right? Or a clasp. Or an exemplary punishment, right? And so this is not about the punishment. Maybe deep in water, right? Sometimes we use a phrase like that when we're really in trouble. So, but it really is a tribute to Andromeda's patience during this ordeal. And I really want to point that out because, again, the Taurus quality that is associated with this full moon has all of the, attributes of patience, right? Allowing things to naturally emerge, not complacency, not being, lazy about it, because that is definitely a Taurus quality on the negative side, but being patient, allowing things to emerge naturally, because Taurus is fixed earth, right? And there is a natural process to everything that happens here. So when it's well aspected, this star does reveal great patience and may and that patience shown here can spring from things like firm faith. And I will say that Scorpio energy does have faith connected to it. Communion and faith is a big part of the Scorpio energy, and trust in the divine, right? And this, Andromeda must have really needed this to like deal with the Kraken coming right up to her face, right? And having the trust and faith that, there would be divine intervention, because she really didn't do anything to deserve this fate, but she still took the responsibility of her role and for her community, right? Her whole entire community would have been wiped out had she not given herself. And this is not about being a martyr. This is about the patience to allow the process to emerge quite naturally. And so there are other connections to Almac as well about good fortune, success, unexpected gains, patient, industrious, good for domestic affairs, right? Again, there's this stuff about eminence and artistic ability, and definitely a connection to like military honors and things like that. So there's a lot of really positive attributes to Almac, even though what we're looking at is the star in the foot that Andromeda is chained to the rock. And so on the surface, you're just like, this is like being, a prisoner. But really, this person this mythological character represents the patience and the trust and the faith in the divine plan to step forward in responsibility for, her community, for something more than herself. And in the end, she was freed, right? And there's that Andromeda energy starseed wise of being truly free. And it's not just free to do whatever the hell you want. It's a true freedom to be in communion with source and with divinity and with the natural process of things. And when you do that, then and you execute and you exhibit that patience and that trust, I mean, the real freedom comes from that. So I wanted to bring that up, to certainly give the connection to the star seeds of Andromeda, but also just, gives another layer to this full moon and the energy associated with needing this patience and this trust and this faith to let these new connections that we are absolutely making right now in all kinds of ways to emerge naturally. And I do see a 6-month type of unfoldment coming when I look at the charts and like look at where everything will be in 6 months. And, end of April into May and even into June just feels like when everything right now that is really burrowing under the surface in scorpionic fashion is going to reemerge brand new. And I mean, I guess that's the case for like spring anyway and Beltane when you come to that time of year, but also too, everything that we're personally working on, that time period seems to be really very related to this full moon. So now I'm gonna exit out of this particular thing, which is the software. There we go. And what I'd like to do now is I'm going to share the chart and we're going to get into the astrology. So let me close some of this stuff out. So, all right. And then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts here of the astrology. So let me take a sip of coffee here. more like a gulp of coffee, but I don't want it to get too cold. All right. So the first thing I want to point out is actually today. So let me make sure this is formatted correctly before we start getting it. Yes, okay. I want to point out today because you can see this T-square is exact today with Venus, Chiron, and Jupiter. So two of the things that are really important, that I think are important, and I actually mentioned them on the new moon forecast because it was part of this whole lunar cycle, is that Mercury is now in Sagittarius. Mars is about to come into Sagittarius, and they're talk about a crusade. Mars in Sagittarius is definitely a crusader, you know what I mean, in the most in a social crusade, a spiritual or religious crusade, whatever you want, because Sagittarius is about the big picture here and about the social value of civilization, and Mars is the warrior. So you can bet that that's going to be pretty prevalent. But Mercury is going to retrograde during this next 2 weeks, and so is Jupiter in Cancer. And I'm going to go a little bit more into, their cycles, when they came into their shadow, when they're retrograding, when they're stationing direct, and when they will exit their shadow. So just also keep in mind that these two energies representing the mind and the higher mind, right? Knowledge, which is Mercury and how our consciousness works, and Jupiter representing the big picture, right? The understanding, the synthesis of ideas into something new, right? This is what Jupiter represents, the big picture here. These two aspects are going to retrograde, and Mercury will come out of its retrograde much sooner than Jupiter will come out of its retrograde. And so maybe the review period mentally and individually with Mercury will have the much shorter 3-week 3-week period. Jupiter is going to be a little bit longer, right? It's going to be a much longer process of inner expansion of understanding. And we're talking about Cancer here, which is where it is. So we're talking about home and family, really the place where we find our individual power, where we're rooted. There's going to be a lot of review and internalized work here that's going to last, again, out easily into June before Jupiter comes back out of its shadow, but it will come out of its retrograde this spring. So we're going to talk about that too. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because Jupiter's involved with this T-square with Chiron and Venus, and the most recent one was the Sun was at this point, not that long ago, in this same T-square. So was Mercury, so was Mars. They were all in this, but it's been more exact with the Sun as Jupiter has come into an exact square with Chiron. So now Venus is here, and granted, Venus is at home in Libra in this T-square. So this is going to be something that we've already worked with in terms of the willfulness and the state of the big picture and the beliefs we have about our home, our family, our tribe, our clan, our nation, right? Cancer represents all of those things. That which is important enough for us to surround with protection, right? Whether it's a womb, whether it's a family, whether it's a tradition, whether it's a root system, right? Whatever it is, our own feelings, right? Cancer is very feeling oriented. That aspect is like drawing all the energy of this T-square down to it, but we still have the opposition of Venus and Chiron, which inevitably brings out all these wounds, especially Chiron and Aries, all of these wounds of self-worth and identity and our ability to be courageous and bold in terms of projecting ourselves into the world and being able to see things, see every situation in its transcendent and cosmic meaning. I feel like it's a little bit, I wouldn't say easier, but it is a little bit more, we can feel it that much more. We can be more sensitive to it with Venus and Libra in this state. this T-square. And again, the energy draws us down to Jupiter in Cancer because that's where the real power comes from, right? We might have wounds of being, our wounds of identity and self-worth with Chiron and Aries, and we're all dealing with that, right? And especially depending on where this is in your chart. Venus is really making it very real and palpable in terms of, without those experiences of woundedness and victimhood, we wouldn't have the opportunity to see and feel the bigger picture. What is actually the nature of this situation, and how do we see beyond it? How do we feel beyond it? How do we think beyond it? Libra being an air sign. So that opposition is there, and it leads you back down to Jupiter in Cancer, which again is about the beliefs and the bigger picture and the understanding of where our true power actually comes from. And so that's happening today. And this is not new. This is just another, like a harmonic, another iteration of this dynamic that's been kind of playing out for the last couple of weeks, especially with the sun being in the same position and Jupiter and Chiron still in a square really strongly is it's not going anywhere. And in fact, because Jupiter is going to retrograde soon, it's going to sit in this square. And so our understanding and our beliefs about where our power is coming from is in a direct friction with these wounds of self and self-worth that Chiron continues to point out to us, right? It's like a festering wound that we can't really get away from. And, maybe we can forget about it for a little while, but really it just continues to present itself. And so Venus is like, when you see things from a cosmic perception, if you see things from a cosmic perspective, then it all makes sense about how it's like perfectly designed in order for our spiritual evolution, right? To be able to see it all in its entirety is how we pull ourselves out of our victimhood and able to transcend it, right? But again, we have to have this sense of personal power, which is where Jupiter in Cancer is really helping anchoring this energy. So that's happening like today as of the 2nd. So I really wanted to point that out in case people are really feeling this energy right now, that it's, look at this T-square. Of course, it's going to be making its presence known. So the thing I want to point out is actually on election day, right? So there are a lot of local elections happening on Tuesday the 4th. But the big thing that I want to point out here is that Mars and Uranus, here, let me get this ad out of the way. Mars and Uranus Mars is going to come into Sagittarius. Remember, I just said about a crusade, right? So this is happening on election day. So this is kind of weird. But they're going to come into an exact opposition with each other on the 4th. And so let's go a few hours ahead just to have this be exact there. It's coming. There we go. 0 degrees Sag, 0 degrees Gemini with Uranus. And that's the other thing too, is that Uranus is going to move back into Taurus during this time as well. So it's still sitting in the Pleiades, but it's going to move back into Taurus. So even more disruption when Uranus is in a fixed earth sign, right? It's one thing to have radical change in ideas when Uranus is in Gemini. It's like, because of the mutability of Gemini, it's really not that hard necessarily. But when it's in radical change in fixed earth energy of Taurus, that's a different story. And so before that even happens, the Mars-Uranus opposition is going to be exact on the 4th. So I thought it would be important to just draw some attention to this. So it creates dynamic tension where there's a desire for independence, which clashes with a need for sudden radical change. So the Mars, and not only independence, but independence towards a belief or, social value, right? With the Sagittarius energy, right? Remember I talked about Mars being on a crusade when it comes into Sagittarius. So a sudden radical change potentially leading to conflicts, sudden disruption to routines, an intense struggle for freedom, a feeling of being controlled. I mean, there are a number of things happening right now socially that you could probably look at, but this is happening exactly on the election day of the 4th. So there are outbursts of anger that can come from this type of opposition that are directed to those that have upset you in the past, right? And so the anger and the resentment might have been building for some time. And I would say with the Uranus retrograde, that could very well be the case, that it's maybe not building so much as the internal struggle has been going on. And then you have Mars that is moving direct into a fire sign that is going to cause the temptation to lash out. Maybe it's been sitting in the background or under the surface, these radical changes of ideas, and the conflict comes out because Mars comes into this fire sign and is ready to act. Right? To lash out and attack. So impulsiveness and disregard can lead you to break free of your responsibilities and obligations. So maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. It just depends on your situation. So just as you may express the anger and frustration of Mars unexpectedly and explosively, you may be subject to unexpected attacks on your character or goals from other people, right? So that's the other side of this, that people will start to get very go on their own crusades, and maybe things have been going on under the surface for them and they finally feel like really bold enough to lash out at you about what you're doing. Either way, you are, whether you're attacking or you're being attacked, the disruption and nervous irritability are bound to make some sort of upset in the routine of your life, right? So if you're like, especially if you're a Taurus person and you really value that like stability and routine, perhaps this is going to be, especially Uranus coming back into Taurus, this could be very disruptive. It's not very helpful. This is not a helpful transit. The best use of this type of energy is to think twice before you lash out, use some tact and some strategy before you react to other people's provocation. And if you use these tactics, maybe you can find some actual freedom from restrictions, and maybe having a little bit of forethought before you open your mouth and attack will kind of, save some relationships, perhaps. But there's a lot of tension with this type of transit that can be very destructive. And there's an energetic push and pull where your desire for, the truth can be met with unexpected shifts and need to, reevaluate your direction. Mars is going on a crusade, but Uranus retrograde is making radical change in ideas and what you thought you knew, maybe internally. And so you're like, yeah, but I want to act on what has been or what I have believed. And maybe there's some radical shift in that information that's happening that's making those changes inside, but people are having a hard time adjusting to it. And this is exactly the type of transit that gets used to manipulate situations, if you know what I mean. So also be on the lookout for that type of stuff, right? That this can be used and, fed into some sort of AI, for instance, to, stir the pot in certain situations. Especially on election day, that seems like a pain. Anyway, we're going to come now into the full moon itself. I just really thought that transit was important to point out leading up to the full moon. So, like I said, the full moon is in Taurus. The sun is in Scorpio, as we know. The 5th of November, remember the 5th of November. If you're not familiar with the gunpowder plot, Guy Fawkes, all of that. I've talked a lot about that on this channel in the past, so I'm not going to go back into it again. So I would encourage you to do a little research about Guy Fawkes, Fawkes, the gunpowder plot, and, even just, V for Vendetta, whether you watch the movie or honestly, the best source of it is to read the graphic novel, read the comic of V for Vendetta. It'll give you a really good idea of what's, what all this energy really represents. But 11 and 5, November 5th, the gunpowder plot and Guy Fawkes Day. It's important to understand what that represents. So the sun, the moon in Taurus, 14 degrees Taurus. Remember we just talked about Almanac, the chained foot of Andromeda. The Sabian symbol for 14 Taurus is on the beach, children play while shellfish, shellfish grope at the edge of the water, right? And so, whenever you've been on a beach or any beach that has a tide and waves coming in and out, oftentimes there'll be like, little crabs and stuff, and they'll be like coming out of the water, and then the wave will come in and crash and then pull them out, right? Pull them back out into the water. And so there's a natural emergence, but there's also children on the beach. That indicates that there is a higher awareness that's still naive and simpler, but still very much coming out of the undifferentiated formlessness of the ocean. Yet there are other aspects, like the shellfish. It's a very Cancerian energy, by the way. If you think about shellfish, right? It's very Cancerian, going back into the ocean, into the formlessness. And so, quite simply, this is about returning to simpler joys, right? But it's the connection between reaching out on a broad evolutionary scale and then just being in the moment and allowing these things to emerge quite naturally. So there is an integrity of selfhood through its attention to its own business of continuing to be. So again, the full moon is a time where our purpose is clarified. There's a fulfillment here. And then from here on out in the lunar cycle, it is up to the individual consciousness objectively to apply this as the light of the moon wanes away. And so even though things start to retract and situations start to pull back and distill, we still have to take that clarification of purpose that is illuminated by the full moon and apply it, even if there are situations that are challenging that. And oh boy, they will be challenged when we get to the third quarter moon, which is going to be especially disruptive when I get to it and explain it to you. So here's our full moon. What I want to show you, just so you have a visual representation here, is 6 months from now what the chart looks like. So I just want to show you real quick. If you're not watching and you're just listening because you're multitasking, I will tell you, you have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all retrograde. Chiron is retrograde. Mercury and Jupiter are soon to be retrograde. So you have all these retrogrades in the chart. And you go 6 months from now, roughly to when the sun is at the same degree as the full moon is. So it'll be 13 to 14 degrees, right? Which is November, 6 hours. What? No, 6 months. Thank you very much. There we go. 6 months. So 6 months on May 5th, roughly, it's actually May 4th that it'll be exactly at the position. And if you are looking, you can see that there are no retrogrades at all, except for the nodes of the moon. And the nodes of the moon are always retrograde. So everything is moving direct by the beginning of May 2026. Even Jupiter's transit of Cancer is direct. Mars will be in Aries. Okay, so the crusade is happening, but by the time we get to May, Mars is going to be acting on its own accord at that point, and just like instinctually acting. Saturn will be fully into Aries, Neptune fully into Aries. Uranus will be back at Alcyon, which is where it's at right now. It will be out of retrograde and back at Alcyon. So the South Node is going to be conjunct Alpha Draconis. Oh boy, I'm telling you, this early part of May is going to be off the hook. Even Chiron is direct, and it will be in conjunction with the Andromeda Galaxy. So I suspect that at this point, what we all feel is emerging will be what we are identified with and will be very much on the surface come early May. So just to give you perspective here about patience, trust, and faith, and not getting lost in all of the other stuff. And that's going to be Venus and Scorpio, getting lost in all of the other things that are going to float in front of our awareness, that are going to take us away from the focus that we maybe have been working with, right? There'll be all these other things that'll pull us into the swamp, so to speak. And it'll be very difficult to pull it's going to be like, not quicksand, but kind of like, like mud. If you've ever gone into, what I'm thinking about is, the times that I've gone into, there's like a lake that we'll go to. Then there's like a state park around here, and there's a big lake that has a beach, and people swim in and people boat in. And this summer, I just remember taking my kayak and just casting right off of the beach, and just the mud, in the shallow part of the lake, as I'm getting, walking out with the kayak, it's like your feet get stuck in the mud, right? And all that suction. That's the imagery that I get with Venus and Scorpio, that you just kind of get sucked into what's happening, the mud at the bottom. The other thing about it is, if you think about the lotus blossom, right, that the lotus blossom on top of the lily pad is beautiful, and it blooms, but the root system goes all the way down into the murky depths, into the mud. So that's the other side of Venus and Scorpio, and the potential there. But you have to actually go down into the murky depths and put your root system into the mud, and you can get stuck there. And that seems like Venus and Scorpio is going to be that time period where people are going to potentially get really stuck in that journey, or just get consumed by all of the other intoxicating options that are really not in alignment with, the higher self and the spiritual journey. So anyway, that's going to be Venus and Scorpio. I keep getting caught on that, but I think it's because it's going to really matter over the coming weeks. So that's the full moon, right? Of 13 to 14 degrees Taurus, 13 to 14 degrees Scorpio. Telephone linemen installing new connections, right? There is an awareness, there is a sustainment, there is an expressiveness around the action, in some cases, of installing these new connections. They may not be fully connected until later, but the installation is something that we're very aware of and fulfilled by right now. It's just the full moon clarifies that feeling within each of us of the emergence of what comes from that down the road quite naturally. So it's not going to come about right away, but it will require that we pay attention to the business of continuing to be, right? We actually have to participate again, right? The conscious participation. We have to actually walk over the bridge. So as we go through this first week after the full moon, we're going to have Mars in a sextile to Pluto, which gives a lot of energy, willpower, and courage, a lot of intense drive. There will be no procrastinating, and you can stay focused, right? Something deep inside is very, we feel very driven when Mars and Pluto are in a sextile, because they both rule the Scorpio energy. So when they're in a very harmonious and transformative type of transit, like a sextile, it's usually giving us all of, as you can see here, giving us all of these energies. And I would say, based on the position that they're in and the degree, it'll have a lot to do with really taking the unexpected adverse circumstances socially that Pluto in Aquarius is representing, and using that to tackle something that might seem too difficult, or did seem too difficult, right? And it's not aggressive, but it gives you this surge of adrenaline, basically, to win, to get what you are working towards, right? Once you've decided on a course of action, you will continue with determination, right? It's a harmonious blend of ambition and transformation with this transit. So you can see that right off the bat, from the full moon, you get this surge of energy, which I think is really beneficial. And it's not something where you are jumping the gun. It's very measured and ambitious. But again, you have to know what it is you're moving towards. It's a harmonious, like I said, harmonious blend of ambition and transformation, where a person's drive for freedom and exploration, which is the Mars and Sagittarius energy, is powerfully supported by a desire for radical, liberating change, which is Pluto in Aquarius. So there's a dynamic energy that translates into passionate, focused pursuits of and personal power. So this is a really good transit. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to show up right away in real time. That's the Taurus energy that's going to take us out into May. But what it is going to do is, give us that determined energy to install those new connections further. Now, on top of that, here we have Venus coming into the last degree of Libra in conjunct with Neptune in Pisces. So here's where things about reevaluating ideals and confronting illusions in relationships comes into play. So you have all this dynamic energy, and on the same time you have confusion in relationships, and you're forced to adjust your idealized notions, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it can be very confusing when you have all this dynamic energy on the one hand, and then you have this other energy. This is like, you have to really know the difference between, this is forcing us to determine what is idealistic versus reality. And maybe there is a difficult decision that needs to be made. But the other thing about that is that we release these old illusions. And so it's going to, even though these reevaluations are difficult, they're going to be very beneficial for releasing old stuff and letting go of what has got, well past its prime anyway, that we've had a hard time letting go of. And then Venus comes into Scorpio and then does another quincunx to Uranus. Again, more relationship tension, more sudden shifts in values, right? Another opportunity for internal reassessment. And in fact, you can see that there is, a yod. Imagine that, a finger of God taking us right back to Venus at the last degree of Libra, right? Being able to conceptualize the whole picture of Venus in the last degree of Libra, right? A holistic approach to knowledge. It's just not a linear, just like this information and this information and this information. It's all brought together into one pattern. And of course, a yod or a finger of God is these two with Uranus and Neptune in a sextile, but they are both in conjunct with one position that points to it. And that's where the finger of destiny is pointing, is Venus in this. I mean, this is a very powerful moment because Venus rules this sign. And so in the last degree of a sign, you're getting the culmination, you're getting the fulfillment of it. And so Venus, out of all of the planets, is able to really manage this position of Libra because it's her home territory. Holistic approach to knowledge is basically like, I can feel the balance of these scales and I can understand exactly what the nature of this relationship truly is. And so things are moving. There might be, like I said, reevaluating, reassessing, sudden shift in values, but the reality is it's actually all information being filtered into this particular system where we come out of it knowing the nature of these relationships, at least intellectually. How we feel about them is going to be Venus and Scorpio. And you don't always know what's going to come out of that communion in terms of resources or feelings. You might have an idea, but it's just like any type of situation. You can intellectualize it all day long, but when you actually experience it, that's where you get to the truth. And if there is any sign that was about truth, truly, it is Scorpio. So we come into the 7th, and so all next week, I mean, it continues to get more difficult as we have this full moon energy still very present of natural emergence. And so Venus is going to, as you can see, it's going to come into a square with Pluto. Not the first square with Pluto from the Scorpio realm. There's been plenty already, but Uranus is going to enter into Taurus again. So you can bet that things are going to shift and change in reality very quickly and radically. It won't be new because Uranus has already been here. So this will be these changes having an internal impact on each of us. But then you have Venus squaring Pluto, which has a profound effect on everything that you love, right? Power and control issues start to arise. Simmering tension manifests. At the root of these behaviors is deeply buried fear or insecurity about not feeling loved, not feeling valued, right? When you're talking about communion and you're talking about Venus, I mean, it is very important to feel loved and valued. And so you may not feel like you're loved or valued. Maybe you feel like you're being abused and used. Maybe you're being manipulated. Other parts of Venus square Pluto are threats and ultimatums. and unhealthy relationships break down, which can be very dramatic and very painful, right? So even a well-based relationship can withstand the intensity of this transit, though. I mean, it doesn't mean there won't be things, but it may be so like minor that it just like is a blip on your radar. So some transformation would still be undertaken within the dynamics of the relationship, but they're not dramatic and painful. They're just like, wow, that was intense. And then you move on, right? And, you know, the themes here with a Venus square Pluto, especially Venus coming into Scorpio, power struggles, intense passion, potential for dramatic big breakups or betrayals. These are all possibilities, especially with Uranus coming back into Taurus, which is like physical reality, and radical change there. So this aspect really does heighten the emotions, and it leads to confrontations over loyalty and desires. But there's so much opportunity to confront and break free of toxic cycles and insecurities, right? So relationships might be strained as things that were hidden are come to the surface, or, some sort of dramatic event takes place that you didn't plan for, right? It's unexpected, but what it does in the process is release the essence of like the putrid nastiness that's been encased in that relationship this whole time. So it's very transformative. So power struggles, intense emotions, dramatic events, confronting the hidden, lots of breakups and transformation with Venus square Pluto like this, especially in Scorpio and Aquarius. And be prepared for the confrontation. Like even, being prepared for it, again, gives you that ability to have some forethought and not necessarily just like feed into the negative aspects of it. So this is on the 7th of November that this is exact. Let go of what no longer serves you. I mean, it's so cliche, but in this case, it's really true. And then you move on to the 8th, which I believe we're getting into next weekend now. Next Saturday, the 8th. And you can see that the sun is in a very favorable aspect with the nodes of the moon. Very fortunate alignment with personal will, right? The sun in Scorpio and soul's growth and destiny, right? There's just so much disruption and challenge all through the week. Oh, I just saw a blue jay. Oh, they're actually quite nasty. But I really enjoy them because they're just kind of more on the masculine side in terms of their energy. Blue jays are, and so they can be kind of aggressive. So, but at the same time, just talking about all of this stuff, maybe you need that energy necessarily to address and confront some difficult issues, right? So I take that as, it's literally just hanging out right in my field of vision right now. So the blue jay seems like a really good symbolic representation of everything I've been talking about. So, but the sun coming into this trine with the North Node, for instance, right? This is, can manifest feelings of being on the right path, increased intuition, compassion, spiritual understanding, right? All these kind of Pisces themes where the North Node is. It's a really good time to take bold action on your desires. So you have all this really troubling and disruptive and weird energy all through the week as we're in this full moon period. And then we get to next weekend and we have this transit, which is helping us really align our actions to our soul's growth, that there's emotional transformation, fulfilling our purpose, that kind of stuff. And the other side of it, though, is to just be aware of unrealistic expectations. All the idealism of Pisces can be very beneficial. The thing about Sun and Scorpio, for instance, is the fact that you can't really get away from the truth there. Even if you don't like it, you want to turn away and run away screaming. The reality is still right there in Scorpio. And so this, I think, is going to be very beneficial. Because right after that is when Mercury stations retrograde and then Jupiter stations retrograde. This is the 9th is Sunday, and 11/11, which is Veterans Day in the United States, is the following Tuesday. So spend a little time talking about those retrogrades and what their cycles are. So Mercury retrograde, right? It happens pretty often. If you have a Mercury retrograde in your natal chart, for instance, or if it's a current progression, This is especially natal though, it's like a blueprint you're not going to ever get rid of in your natal chart. And so you are more aligned with and more oriented towards Mercury being retrograde, which is more reflective, retrospective, really reviewing the material wherever Mercury is. And so keep in mind that Mercury is at its weakest in Sagittarius because it does not want to synthesize material. It wants to just play around in the realm of ideas, right? It is not about alchemy as much as being the magician. Those are two different things, aren't they? So, because when you're making something brand new, with alchemy, the magician just wants to basically manipulate what is to fit their agenda or whatever it is, right? So Mercury is already at its weakest in Sagittarius. I think as a Mercury Sag person that is retrograde in their natal chart, I would say that if I was to honestly assess this, the retrograde of Mercury in Sagittarius really helps with its weakness in Sagittarius, because at least you are reviewing belief systems, understandings. You are taking the what Mercury is really good at, which is the processing of information. And so you're not necessarily synthesizing material, but maybe unraveling it in Sagittarius, unraveling belief systems, unraveling what you understand, unraveling the big picture, and really reassessing those things. And so I think the retrograde of Mercury in Sagittarius it helps with the detriment of otherwise Mercury being in Sagittarius. So 7 degrees Sagittarius, which is where it retrogrades, is Cupid knocks at the door of a human heart. So it's this emotional, individualized, intense, emotional, passionate feeling of your heart being stirred in Sagittarius. The retrograde here is going to go back to 21 Scorpio. And if you remember, this is where Mars and Mercury were actually just conjunct. It was actually 20 degrees, but it was pretty much right here at 20 to 21 degrees Scorpio. So this is also the degree that we're going to see where the sun will be at for the third quarter moon. So I want you to put a pin in this, okay? This is where Mercury is going to retrograde back to, and it's going to be on the 21st of November. It will station direct at 21 degrees of Scorpio. What is 21 degrees of Scorpio? Obeying his conscience, a soldier resists orders, okay? This is where Mercury is going to go back to. And it's going to station direct. So all of this energy from Sag back into Scorpio is going to be reevaluated, proofread, reassessed. We're going to review all of this information. And then it's going to exit its shadow, right? Come out of this shadow of retrograde on the 6th of December. So it'll come back to 7 degrees Sagittarius on the 6th of December. So that's going to start on the 9th. And so when did it come into its shadow? It entered its shadow on the 21st of October. What happened on that day? That was the new moon. So this whole new moon period leading up to the next new moon is all wrapped up in the Mercury retrograde, right? And so we get a little bit of a gift here. And I think Mercury retrogrades are always kind of a gift, because I think that, I certainly function in a way where having the opportunity to really reassess and review things is a huge benefit. And so we're going to get that with this Mercury retrograde, all about our conscious participation, having our purpose clarified and fulfilled around, the what we have faith in and what we are communing to create, and what new connections we're working to install, and how that's going to emerge later down the road. Those are, we get an opportunity right now to really reassess what we believe, what we understand, and then what's going back into Scorpio, the truth of the situation. So that, I think, is a huge benefit. And when Mars and Mercury first came in their conjunction at the same degree that it's going to, entered its shadow on the new moon, you have to be very clear about your conscience and, what you are resisting, right? You want to be really clear with yourself, because there's a whole slew of events that are the fallout of doing something like resisting orders. Like a military person resisting orders is a big deal. And if you're obeying your conscience, you better be very clear that it is your conscience and not some, projected or implanted set of values that really aren't yours. And I think this Mercury retrograde is really going to give us the opportunity to assess that before we really move forward. So that's the 9th, Tuesday the 11th. This is where Jupiter stations and goes into its retrograde. It entered its shadow in August and will station direct in March. So this is an exit shadow early June. So this is a much larger cycle to be aware of. And just keep in mind that Jupiter is very much exalted in Cancer. It's very powerful in Cancer because it can endlessly expand into the depths of our own being. That's what Cancer, our root system is only limited by, the strength to actually penetrate through life, right? Just like a root system can go endlessly as long as there's a place for it to go. And Jupiter is about this endless expansion. So it's not any less powerful in retrograde. It's just, this is going to be a period of many months. Again, 6 months, more like 7 months before it's fully out of its retrograde shadow, definitely until March, where it will be, it will station direct at 16 degrees Cancer. But really not come out of its shadow again, like I said, till early June. So this whole period leading up to that is, again, an inner expansion of where our true power comes from. And really, again, like doing that work. And I think that that's going to be where the patience really needs to come into play, personally, is that process. Because we are, this is an opportunity to reinforce and strengthen that root system before expanding further out, if that makes sense. And I'm getting a lot of like internalized, like intuitive, like yes on that one. So I would say that this next 6 months is the time to really do that work and reinforce and strengthen what's already there, rather than continuing to expand outward. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, this is a great opportunity to do that inner work with Jupiter in its retrograde. It also could be that people are really pulling in and, again, reevaluating their belief systems about, where they belong, right? What does it mean to be part of a family? What does it mean to be part of a tribe or a clan? What does it mean to be part of a nation, right? Those are all belief systems around those things. And, our, desire to want to protect and to be loyal and to, surround those vulnerable things with that, that which protects, and like a womb, like a family, like a nation. Those are all Cancerian themes. It's very conservative, and I'm not saying politically, I'm saying like quite literally. That's Cancer energy is very conservative. You're conserving, you're protecting. And I think that there will be a lot of reevaluating belief systems around these things during the Jupiter retrograde as well. So then we come into the third quarter moon, which will be on Wednesday the 12th. Remember what I said about where Mercury is going to retrograde to? And you can see that Mars and Mercury are going to conjunct again, this time in Sagittarius, and we'll get to that. But you remember where I talked about the third quarter moon and how it's the same degree that the sun is in that Mercury will eventually, station direct, which is 21 Scorpio. So the sun is at 21 Scorpio, right? A soldier obeying his conscience resists orders. Well, where's the moon going to be? So a third quarter moon is always a crisis point. And in this case, it's a crisis of consciousness, because we've had our purpose fulfilled with the full moon. It's been clarified. The light of the moon is waning now, but we still have to apply that knowing to our situation. And the third quarter moon is a moment where all of the extraneous crap needs to be released, right? We're distilling everything down to the essence of how this lunar cycle started with the new moon, which was in the last degrees of Libra. right? Actually, where Venus is going to be coming into like this weekend into early next week. So 21 degrees, so it'll actually be 20 to 21 degrees that you'll see the square with the sun and the moon. There it is right there. 21 degrees is a very interesting degree in Sabian symbol language. 21 degrees Leo is intoxicated chickens dizzily flap their wings trying to fly. I always think about this particular degree as the Kundalini awakening that is unmanaged and is a premature expansion of consciousness. So you think about just like chickens just going, like a chicken with their head cut off, for instance, right? If you want to think about it that dramatically, that's what this third quarter moon is. I would say with everything, the fact that Mercury is retrograding back to this point, 21 Scorpio, the fact that this third quarter moon has this connection to Leo, which is very dramatic in terms of what it represents, I would certainly be prepared for the tension of like what that bring. Like I said, there's all this stuff that is a fallout from, obeying your conscience. It may trigger something emotionally in you that is kind of like a premature expansion of consciousness. It may trigger this experience that's kind of like a premature Kundalini awakening where you're just like flapping your arms, convincing yourself that you can fly, and it is just going to bring up a lot. And I would say that there's nothing wrong with this experience. And in fact, I think it's going to clarify, that crisis point and really be like, okay, what do I need to really strip down here? In terms of this experience. So, the third quarter moons, I think, are always the most difficult. I think they're more difficult than the first quarter moons. The first quarter moons are like, what do I do? Because there's like, some sort of conflict or confrontation that you have to respond to right away after you set those intentions, right? Of just like, okay, this is the conflict that is going to start building when you are attempting to make change in your life, with setting intentions. I always think the third quarter moon is the most difficult because you have to let go of something. You have to consciously let go of something and really distill things down to what is the most important. And I just, I just see people seriously emotionally just freaking out. That could very well happen. I mean, it's kind of just written into it, it's like baked into the cake. And then you have Mercury and Mars that are going to conjunct right after this, this third quarter moon. So but the good thing before we get to the end of this lunar cycle, honestly, well, there's a couple things. Let me see here. So these two, like I said, these two will be conjunct pretty much right at the same time. It's this third quarter moon, Mercury and Mars. And so again, there's that, this, drive and this intense, ambitious energy, but Mercury this time is retrograde. Conjunct Mars, and so Cupid is knocking at the human heart, and Mars is like, let's go, let's open the door, we're on our crusade. And Mercury's like, wait a minute, I'm not really sure about this right now. But then you have this quarter moon that's like really kind of testing it. Again, here's this freak out that I feel like could really be coming. And then there's a lot of really balanced emotional energy soon after that. So, but actually not soon enough, I would say within 5 days. So this third quarter moon phase, it's not like it happens and then it's over, right? The third quarter moon phase lasts, a couple of days. And so we're going to go through Thursday the 13th, Friday the 14th, through this whole process. And then we're going to get to the 17th, which is where this grand trine really comes into effect with the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn, really. So I want to share that with you because this is going to be very stabilizing, in my opinion. So here is this grand water trine, as I said. So emotionally very stabilizing. Sun trine Jupiter, right, is now Jupiter's retrograde. Remember, we just talked about this. Describes a period of inner growth and reflection where your personal power, which is Sun in Scorpio, Pluto, and your emotional security, which is Jupiter in Cancer, can be deeply integrated. Your personal power and your emotional security. So you have all this other stuff that's like triggering these freakouts, right? And then you're really working with that over the number of days. And then you get to this point that really, brings a very harmonious flow between self-expression and your emotional security. And it's a very good time for deep emotional exploration. So you may find that you just freak out for a couple days, and then you get to the balsamic moon phase and you have this grand water trine that really builds a strong foundation, and you find a sense of personal security through your own introspection. And then on top, so that's just Sun trine Jupiter. You add the trine to Saturn on top of that with the sun, and it's a period of very disciplined focus to your emotional and spiritual pursuits, another harmonious blend of intuition and very practical action. It's very beneficial to channel intense emotional energy into creating something that's lasting, that's tangible, and to reassess your responsibilities, right? And you want to be realistic, but also compassionate. So it's very practical with the Sun trine Saturn. There is an integration of emotions. Your feelings are not just for feeling, they're a source of motivation, right? Instead of identifying with your feelings, which is very easy to do, you identify your feelings and then you allow them to be the compass for your motivation and your action. So there's responsible transformation here, and reassessing boundaries, balancing your dreams and reality. This is very emotionally grounding by the time we get to the 17th. Mercury is going to sextile Pluto, a more period of introspection. So it's like we need the third quarter moon freak out period, but and to just give us perspective. And then by the time we get here to the 17th, the 18th, the 19th, which is the balsamic moon phase, we have this grand water trine. We have Mercury sextile Pluto. In its retrograde, so we're really introspective, reevaluating our beliefs, our communications, our intellectual pursuits, right? And potentially gaining deeper insights. And then right before the end of the lunar cycle, it's a little kind of like, whoa, you have Mercury opposite Uranus, as you're going to see here. I'll show it to you. Mercury is going to be back into Scorpio. So as you can see here, it's back into Scorpio. This is Wednesday the 19th, right as we come into our next new moon. So we're in the balsamic moon phase. Mercury, and by the way, that new moon is going to be conjunct Mercury, as well. You can see this whole mashup here in Scorpio. But Mercury and Uranus are going to be opposite. Now they're both retrograde. So even if there are sudden disruptions that lead to breakthroughs, especially like deep-seated issues and personal values, it's going to be much more internalized, right? It really forces, again, a very deep introspective look at your emotions and your fears, and of course, Uranus and Taurus is going to encourage the reevaluation and updating of your relationships with the physical world, as I said, money and security. And so expect moments of unexpected insight or conflict. I mean, even with this transit being normally very disruptive mentally with Mercury and Uranus, the fact that they're both in Earth and water signs, they're both retrogrades, they're both in positions of the Pleiades, just know that there's a renewed sense of stability that can come through the sudden disruptions that we all may be experiencing internally from this transit. At the same time this is happening, Mercury will be in a trine to Neptune retrograde. So you have a spiritual and intuitive flow that, again, creates a period of deep introspection. I mean, there's tons of deep introspection that is coming throughout this second half of the lunar cycle and this Taurus full moon that is really going to set the tone for, what naturally emerges over the next 6 months. But we really need to kind of lean into the disruptions that force this deep introspection. But it's not that they're, like I said, this grand water trine with Jupiter, Saturn, and the Scorpio sun is very stabilizing and gives us the opportunity to find our emotional security through our power and our power of transformation, and really being identified with that. That's really what the sun represents. So by the end of this 2 weeks, I mean, we'll get to a point where we are feeling very secure in our ability to deeply be introspective about beliefs, about how we feel about our relationships and what's coming out of them, about our spiritual responsibility, Saturn and Pisces, and even just the idealistic aspect of spirituality, which is Neptune in Pisces. So again, very deep introspection where emotional insights are enhanced by logical analysis. That's the Mercury part. And it's a time for revisiting and reevaluating very complex emotional truths, right? It's not going to be easy. You're not talking about simple things here for any of us. And, creative breakthroughs and really understanding our own motivations. But we have to, again, be able to balance we have to feel the balance so that we can avoid getting caught up in delusion. And that's where I see, Venus will be moving very rapidly through Scorpio. And I feel like that's going to be where it's going to be difficult to stay balanced and not kind of just get sucked in by all the intoxicating delusions that keep us, if you've ever had, substance abuse in your past or even currently, or addictions, that's exactly what they do, right? They're just a way for you to bypass all of the work that needs to be done to unpack your own shit, essentially, right? And I think most people, whatever it is, have been there, right? I mean, I certainly have been there. So, and I understand that that's exactly what was happening. So, wow, whoo-wee. Okay, I think we're going to just leave that right there. We're going to have plenty to talk about when we get to oh my gosh, when we get to the Scorpio new moon. So, a lot of intensity. There is a lot of Scorpio in this chart, and you can see that this forecast or this transmission went, a little bit longer than usual, like 90 minutes, but, that's just how I roll. And if you've ever had a reading for me, that also too, it's very thorough and I give a lot of information. And this is something you can go back to throughout the next 2 weeks and listen to and be like, oh yeah, that's that time period right now that she was talking about that's happening now. And oh yeah, I do feel like I'm freaking out. So maybe I should listen to this again so I can get some insight on when and how things are going to stabilize a little bit and how I can make the best use of that energy for my own sanity, and also to actually utilize that to catalyze my own spiritual progression and evolution and learning. So guys, thank you for being here. I really appreciate all of you so much. Get some smoky quartz if you can. Or whatever works for you. Just quartz in general is so incredibly powerful. Last week, I think something was really getting on top of people because everybody was feeling really off. And this change of the seasons, the barometric pressure where I'm at, whatever, the spraying started again, right? But by the end of the last week, I started getting really like systemically inflamed. And I was like, man, I put on a piece of quartz and it was done. Right? The piezoelectric effect of quartz just really functions as a medium to just move that shit right through you. So smoky quartz has a similar effect, but because the smoky color is a response to natural irradiation over time, it's really good for that stuff. And it's also very grounding and anchoring as well. So quartz doesn't always ground you and anchor you, but smoky quartz does, and then also does the cool things that quartz does as being piezoelectric. So take care of yourselves as best you can. Take care of each other as best you can as well. Let's support each other. And I will see you guys on the next transmission, right? Catalyst membership. I have got some personal readings on deck for you today. And next week, your Catalyst energy reading will be available to you. So if you're interested in getting those bi-monthly energy readings as well, you can, like I said, look into Catalyst membership. Everything you need is in the description box below. I'm going to go rest my voice before I move on to the next reading. Take care, y'all. I'll see you later.